Kashern Sins was a show that almost existed in a vacuum. It was one that kind of got me into anime because I was super, super passionate about it when I first watched it, but I didn't continue on after that. It was just sort of something I felt inspired by and led the groundwork for me to get into anime later, but it was never something that I felt this immense sense of passion about after I watched it. And there were a few other Adult Swim shows like this. I began watching the network more when Dead Man Wonderland came out. I remember specifically Blue Exorcist being on as well, and some other show. It was probably Bleach. When Dead Man Wonderland came out, it was this very dark, gritty show that was set in this small prison atmosphere. What I really loved about it is how much it focused on the prison itself and the characters' lives within that. It was just sort of on at nighttime. I remember being kind of dizzy and tired and ready to fall asleep. But instead of falling asleep, I was just so intrigued by these characters and their interactions in this strange world. It really was the premise that kept me watching that show. It was the plot. I loved the premise so much that I was just so invested in continuing. And so this show was very much like nothing I had seen before in certain ways, stylistically. It reminded me of films like The Road from 2009, where it had this very, like, isolated, apocalyptic feeling, but at the same time, it felt very much like anime. And so it made me interested in this medium that was very dark and edgy and of cartoons that was just sort of on Adult Swim at the time. I went on to watch Blue Exorcist and a couple of the other shows, and this was one of the instances throughout that time that really cemented my fandom. I believe this was a year or so after I watched Kashern Sins. I'm not entirely sure, but it was definitely months after. Nonetheless, this show hit me at a very fundamental time in growing as a fan of the medium. Seeing a show that had these very slow-paced, methodical moments, as well as having very edgy violence, banking on this kind of dystopian setting that I was really into beforehand, was very much my type of show. I don't know if I'd enjoy it nearly as much as I did back then now, but at the time, it had so many things that appealed to me. Blood and gore and a weird setting and premise, methodical moves through that premise, as well as focusing heavily on said plot. And so it did very much appeal to me. In 2013, I was 11 years old, and I first saw Kill la Kill on Adult Swim, from episode 1 all the way to the end. This show was very controversial within my household because my mom did not want me watching Kill la Kill because of all the tits and all the violence and how over the top it was. But my dad thought it was hilarious, and so did I at the time. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was better than most things I had seen in terms of cartoons. And it was always mentioned as like, oh wow, this anime does these things. Anime has these types of things. And I distinctly remember my dad explaining to me about this film called Erotsukidoji, where it had had much of this, like, intense hentai type of stuff. And he was just telling me these memories he had of, like, weird hentai OVAs like this. And so he was explaining all these things to me as we watched it, and we were just sort of collectively enjoying this weird, bizarre thing. And let me tell you, if you've seen Kill la Kill, which I assume most of the people watching this video have or at least know about it, it is fucking bizarre. And so that is a gateway to anime. Having another family member explain to me as if that is what anime is was very much an eye-opening experience. It was very much an experience that told me, wow, this thing, this Japan thing is so weird and cool and cute and whatever. And I really enjoyed the show at the time just for how creative and odd it was and overtly perverted that it was. And so that as an understanding of anime, seeing all these, gross, perverted things going on as well as these over-the-top violent things, having something so overtly over the top, and then having that directly explained to me by someone else as a pinnacle of what anime is, really colored my perception of the medium, and it made me want to explore said medium even more. And so I think in many ways, Kill la Kill and these other Adult Swim shows that I've been mentioning across this series had a profound impact on my understanding and interest in the medium. But before all this happened on Adult Swim, back before I was even getting ready to go into school, there was this little studio that we all know and love called Ghibli. Somehow I just randomly stumbled upon all of their movies. Now, I had grown up with Ghibli beforehand. According to my dad, I had seen Spirited Away when I was very young. I don't remember much of that, but apparently it happened. And I had seen a few of the other films. Before that, I had seen Secret of Arrietty when it first came out on DVD, and I was a ginormous fan of that film. It was instantly one of my favorite movies of all time when it first came out. I had seen a few other Ghibli films offhand that I couldn't really remember. What I ended up doing was just by accident finding all of these films. I don't know if I looked on the DVD box of Arrietty and then just looked up the studio or the director and then found out that all of these other films existed. I just somehow stumbled across one of them and then decided to watch a bunch of the other ones. I remember one of them was Castle in the Sky from the 80s, and The Cat Returns. Those are the two that I remember most heavily. Grave of the Fireflies was definitely the biggest one out of all of those films that I watched. There was another Miyazaki film other than Castle in the Sky, but I don't even remember what it was by this point. Point being, I had watched a bunch of Ghibli films on this random movie streaming website that I don't even think you can find anymore. I just happened to find them to stream there and then downloaded them on my then Windows XP computer so I could transfer them onto an SD card onto my PS3 and watch them on my television. I know it's an esoteric process. I had been watching these films and I was super enthralled by their fantasy worlds that they created, by the characters within them, by everything about them. Love them 100%. Getting into these movies was a very integral part of me getting into anime. Now, as I said, I don't really remember if I had seen Adult Swim after or before, but I'm pretty sure it was before based on me not going into school yet. Watching those films, kind of back to back after downloading them was pretty incredible. And I remember The Cat Returns specifically was a ginormous experience for me, just seeing a world that fantasy-like and connecting with that childish and wonderful of a story. It was breathtaking. And Ghibli films are something that appeal very much to the heart. They're something that appeal very much to the children in us. Because of that purity of fantasy and of childlike wonder, it fully cemented me as a fan of this thing that existed. And Ponyo was one of them, actually. Ponyo was one of the other ones, and I fucking loved that movie when I watched it. It was instantly one of my favorite films of all time. Holy shit. I was way into that movie. So I was enraptured by these fantasy worlds that really got to me. But what I didn't expect when I was looking through these films was a little movie called Grave of the Fireflies, and to this day, this is one of my favorite anime of all time. I tend to say that Cowboy Bebop is my favorite. The second favorite is probably Grave of the Fireflies, just by how emotionally intense it is and how well written and directed it is. It's not simply a film that puts things in your face to make you cry. It is a film that methodically shows the lives of these people and develops them as real people. It makes you connected to them as human beings that exist, that are real. That's the level of development that this film creates, and it's masterfully crafted. Everything about it makes you feel that these people are real and exist and can better empathize with them. At the time seeing this, I wasn't normally crying at media. I wasn't used to that. But it had such a profound impact on me that it jerked tears, and that was something that I didn't expect. That was something that caught me way off guard when I watched that film. Just thinking about all of the military concepts that were in it, that these things have an effect on people in war, thinking about the effects that it had for the children. I was like 12 at the time, so, I was very young. Seeing these things was just breathtaking to me. It was mind expanding, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. It was instantly my favorite movie of all time because it was just so good at delivering upon these concepts and emotions. To this day, it's one of the most beautifully directed movies and one of the most well animated. Everything about it, everything about its setting reeks of perfection and of planning, and you can see all of the effort that was put into it animation wise and in terms of aesthetics and just using cinematography to convey emotions and ideas about these people. Everything about it was done so well. The animation in that movie, like seeing how well done it was just, oh my god, it was a mind-altering experience. As you can tell, I really liked Grave of the Fireflies. I can't even express into words just how impactful that was for me to see that movie at that age, at that time. It was one of the only movies I would watch subtitled because I remember specifically burning it to a DVD, or not a DVD, a CD. This blue little CD that I didn't turn it into a video CD, I just burned it as a data disc so I could watch it on my PS3. That was one of the only films I would watch subtitled because I was just that into it. I was just that invested in that film that normally I would watch dubs, but this one I'm going to put in the effort to watch. And boy howdy was I glad I put in the effort to watch that movie. It's not something I would normally do, but at the time, I was just so enthralled by it that I needed to. Yeah, Grave of the Fireflies is a film that I can't always necessarily put into words because I haven't rewatched it in quite a while, but that feeling, that time that I was watching it, at that point, is just so enraptured and encarved into my memory that I cannot forget it. I cannot forget those emotions. I cannot forget those people. They feel like longtime friends of mine that have now been deceased. And when I look back on that movie, it's like picking up an old picture of one of your old friends and thinking about all the old times you had with them. Of course, that film doesn't have as many positive connotations in terms of its people because it's rather tragic, but the feeling of nostalgia and the feeling of longing and the feeling of permanence in your memory is very much there. And so I think for someone as forgetful as me in a lot of regards when it comes to media, in this podcast, a lot of the details from the shows I have outright forgotten. There are still scenes within Grave of the Fireflies that stick out in my memory. There are still moments, there are still emotions that I was feeling at the time. Raw emotions that I was feeling at the time still exist and are very real within my psyche. And I think a film that has that much impact, that can remain that permanent within one's brain, is something truly special and is something that should be remembered, that has the right to be remembered. On a technical and emotional level, it is a masterpiece. And it was the film that made me realize Japan is pretty fucking dope. And I gotta explore more of this. Because as I said, I watched that thing subtitled, which was not something 12-year-old me would have done, but because it was so special, I put in the effort. And from having put in that effort, I realized just how great that medium was.